Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in this presentation. My name is Nick Faulds, and I'm an itinerant adapted physical education specialist for Fremont Unified School District, located in Fremont, California. And I previously worked for the California School for the Blind as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this presentation. This is intended for adapted or general physical education specialists that support students who are visually impaired in physical education. So hopefully you're able to take something away from this presentation. Now let's go ahead and get the show on the road. So the title of our presentation today is The Blind Side of Adapted Physical Education. Our purpose today is to provide adapted and general physical educators with tools to support students with visual impairments to successfully participate in various physical education activities. Our objectives for today are to identify different ways to support students with limited vision, list different terms used in orientation and mobility, and demonstrate how to perform the human guide technique. So a part of our job as adapted physical education teachers is to support students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment of learning. And this is the environment where the student can be most successful in reaching their educational potential. And this can include general physical education with general education peers, physical education in a separate location like the cafeteria, auditorium, or a different gym, half push in and half pull out, where you might spend part of the time in inclusive physical education and the other half in a separate location. This can also take place in one-on-one settings or in small group settings. Students with visual impairments, as defined under the IDEA, is an impairment in vision that, even with correction, adversely affects a child's educational performance. And this includes partial sight and blindness. And we are going to go a little more in detail with that shortly. So some general recommendations when supporting students who are visually impaired in physical education is to avoid pronouns. Now, you got to remember these students might have some or no vision at all. And if they ask a question like, where are the badminton rackets? And you say, over there. If I can't visually see where you're pointing, I'm not going to be able to identify where I need to go. So remember in your language when supporting students who are visually impaired to be as descriptive as possible, such as turn right, take about 15 steps forward, and the badminton rackets will be on the left side. Also, it's important to pre-teach the skill or environment to the student prior to the activity to help them be successful, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. And it's important to ask the student for feedback and just ask them, what is the best way that I can support you? What types of colors are easiest for you to see if we're practicing target activities? Do you prefer the human guide technique, or would you rather just have me provide you auditory feedback, such as verbal prompts and things like that? Also, if the student is still a little unfamiliar with you, if this is a newer student who's visually impaired, it's important to say your name prior to speaking to them, because if they can't recognize your voice, it's going to be hard for them to identify who you are. When checking for understanding after a lesson activity, it's very often that we as PE teachers will say, raise your hand if that makes sense, or put a hand on your head if that makes sense. But if I'm visually impaired and can't see the rest of the class, how am I going to know if I'm on the same page with everyone else? But if you utilize an auditory cue such as clap twice if you understand, or stomp your right foot if you understand, that will provide the auditory feedback the student needs to be included with the rest of their class. Applying a variety of different environments is important, because you might be at a school with a child who's visually impaired, and they might spend a lot of their O&M lessons, say, in the multi-purpose room or the auditorium, so they're already pretty familiar with that location and know how to scale it out. And it's important that we do include our students who are visually impaired with their general ed peers, but if we're working on some activities that have a lot of dynamics that's hard for students to comprehend, then maybe taking them to a more familiar environment where they feel more of that emotional safety can be beneficial. Also, it's just good to use other locations as an option, because if you're working with a student with visual impairment on, say, basketball activities, if you're trying to provide those auditory cues that the student needs to be successful and there's 30 other kids there dribbling basketballs, it'll be hard for the student to identify what you are saying as the teacher. Visors or hats for bright lighting, we'll talk about that more a little bit later. We'll also go into tactile boards. Whole part whole. So whole part whole is where you describe the entire skill or activity and then break it into its parts and then go back to the whole again. So if you're working on, say, softball, provide a cognitive map that the student can use and just describe the whole setting, and then go into the details, like this is how you get from first base to second base. This is where the pitcher's mound is in relation to home base, things like that, and then bringing it all back together later on. And then applying a combination of physical guidance and tactile modeling and see what the student prefers. So physical guidance is where you as the instructor will provide hand-over-hand support in the students performing the skill. So if I'm working on the underhand throw and the student's throwing with the right hand, I would put my right hand over their right hand and then actually guide them through the motion of what you're trying to do. And tactile modeling is where the student feels you perform the skill. So if I'm working on the underhand throw, I would be holding onto the ball and the student would put their hand over my hand and I would just guide them through the motion of the skill. And the tactile modeling can get a little tricky sometimes if you have a wingspan and are a lot taller than the student that you're trying to support, because they won't be able to fully grasp the entire motion of the skill. So this is a good area to utilize peer buddies if you have the opportunity. And lastly, collaboration. It's great that we are participating in conferences like this, but it's also important to utilize our orientation mobility specialists and our vision teachers, because they know a lot more about the terminology and strategies that we're going to be going over today, and they're only an email away. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's always important to utilize our vision teachers. So when working with students with visual impairments, it's important to know if the visual impairment is congenital or adventitious. Now, congenital visual impairments, that is when you are born with the visual impairment. So this could be retinopathy of prematurity or Leber's congenital amaurosis, and adventitious would be something like Stargardt's disease or diabetic retinopathy. And identifying these different types of vision losses and knowing whether they were born with it or picked it up later on in life is very important, because if I'm providing something like cues to a student who has a congenital visual impairment and I say we are going to jump like a kangaroo, well, if they have never seen a kangaroo before, they're not going to really get the concept of what you're trying to go over with them. But if I have an adventitious visual impairment and saw a picture of a kangaroo jumping around prior to my vision loss, then I would be able to understand the cue that you are using. It's also important for visual mapping, because if you are talking about a soccer field and the student was born with a visual impairment and has never actually seen a soccer field, versus a student with an adventitious loss who has seen a soccer field before, it'll be a lot easier for that student with the adventitious loss to cognitively map what the soccer field looks like. Also, it's important to keep these types of visual impairments in recognition in terms of motivation, because students who are born with visual impairments, they never knew what it was like to have 20/20 vision, so they are more accustomed to it, and they're more accepting of their vision levels. And students with adventitious loss who were able to see everything with 20/20 vision, then gradually lose it over time, that can be very upsetting for students, and it can cause a lack of motivation when participating in different activities. So those are just some things to really keep in mind when we are supporting students who are visually impaired. So the visual impairment spectrum, this is just a small list of the many different types of visual impairments that are out there. But again, it's important to know the level of what our students' vision is, because they may be visually impaired, but we got to remember that doesn't always mean that they are completely blind. They might have some vision, or they might be nearsighted, such as having myopia, where you would need to perform demonstrations from a very close proximity. And there's hyperopia, where they won't be able to understand the demonstration or see it if you're demonstrating from a close proximity, but if you move further away, it might be easier for that student to see it. So when traveling from like the locker room to the gymnasium or any type of unfamiliar environment for the student, using the human guide technique is very common. And as you can see in the picture on the left, the student is using their cane in one hand and holding the elbow of their guide. And as a guide, it's important to describe what's going on, such as we just left the locker room, we're walking down the hallway, and after 3 seconds of walking, there's a drinking fountain on the right side of the hallway, or some students are passing by us shortly, and just providing the verbal outline of what's going on. And it's important that when we are utilizing the human guide technique, that the student is holding onto the elbow or the wrist and not holding the hand, because we also want to make sure that even though we're supporting them, we need to make sure that they are still fostering that independence. Now, when performing the human guide technique, it's important to ask the student first if they would like to use the guide. And if they say yes, a good way to let them scale your arm and find your elbow is by taking the back of the hands and touching them, because this is a very neutral area, and it's not as overwhelming as just grabbing the student's arm and putting it on your elbow, so that way you can guide them. By touching the back of the hands together, the student can feel where you are, and then scale up your arm, grab your elbow, and then you can go into the human guide so they can travel to wherever they need to go. The upper hand protective guide technique is a very good tool to use when working with students who are visually impaired. This is an orientation mobility technique, and that is where the student is not using their cane, but they're in an unfamiliar environment, and they are taking one hand, bringing it at the forehead, then extend it out. And it's always important to keep the palm facing forward, because as you can tell, the palm has a lot more padding as opposed to the back of the hand. So if you're in a place like the fitness center and you're doing the upper hand protective guide with the back of the hand facing forward, and you go into a machine or something, that's going to smart a little bit more as opposed to something that has more padding. And this is great for places like the fitness center, small confined areas, or crowded places. Use of a tether. Now, when doing different running activities, maybe you're outside running the mile, doing the pacer test, or just doing some type of relay activity, this is a great strategy to use, and it's very easy and very inexpensive because all you really need is just a shoelace. Okay, so if I am the sighted guide and I'm supporting a student who is visually impaired, we're both holding on to the tether, and then I'm running with my proper technique. I'm bringing my arms up and down. It forces the student to perform those proper biomechanics as well. And by me being right there, I'm able to help the student understand the surrounding and know of any unexpected obstacles that may come up, such as there's a puddle we're about to go, so we're going to veer to the right. Or there's some people that are coming up behind us, so we're going to go to the left and let them pass us, then go back to the right lane. Those are great things to do when supporting students who are visually impaired and you're working on running. And it's also very good to use something like a tether, because if say a pack of wild geese just fly in and are just crash landing in front of you, and for some reason you do trip and have to fall down. By holding onto the tether, I can just let go. The student is totally safe. If I had it like tied to my hand and to their hand, if I'm going down, the student's going down too. So that's why it's very important to just use a shoelace, let them hold on to one end, you hold on to the other. Tactile mapping is a very good tool to use when you're going into different sport units, such as basketball or soccer, hockey, anything like that, because you can make a diagram of whatever the court dimensions are using a piece of paper and some pipe cleaners and a hot glue gun. Then the student can feel the map and through haptic touch be able to identify where these different dimensions are, such as the foul line, half court line, the basket, things like that. And you can have the student touch it and describe the game. So left pointer finger is under your basket. You're going to take your right pointer finger, bring it under your basket, and then we're trying to go to this basket. Okay, so that's where using mapping can really come in handy. And if you do collaborate with your vision teachers, you can take the different dimensions of the court or field and have them braille it out, and this way they're identifying where the different parts of the field or court are and also practicing the braille skills. Squaring off is a orientation and mobility term used to have students line up to where they need to go. And this is a great tool to use, not just for physical education, but by practicing this in physical education, you're going to help with that transfer of learning into real life settings, such as leaving a room to go up a flight of stairs and things like that. So squaring off is really just lining yourself up with whatever point of entry or area that you're using. So if I'm, say, playing the goalie position in soccer, and I tell the student to square off, they're gonna feel the goal and line themselves up so the goal is behind them and they are facing their opponents. Use of the guide wire is very beneficial for the student to be able to independently run without using a human guide for different activities, such as whatever you might be doing to warm up by running laps or relay activities, and it's very good for the pacer test as well. I'm just going to pull up a video. So by taking something like a string and then taking another string, tying it to a carabiner, when you have the string attached to 2 anchor points, the student will be able to hold on to the string that's connected, the carabiner connected to the guide wire, and independently run up and down in a predictable environment so they can be successful. Pre-teaching. So this is very important to utilize for students with visual impairments in physical education, because they might be going into a mini golf lesson, which is what I have set up right in here, or the fitness center. And prior to the start of the unit, it's important to have the student come in and just identify where hazardous areas are and other important areas are. So I'm walking into the gym. I explain to the student, you walk in, walk about 20 steps forward. This is where all the equipment will be. Then turn right, take 10 steps forward. This is where we'll start the activity. And then just let them explore without explaining where everything is also. So that way they can independently identify these different areas of the activity. Use of elevated boundaries is very important. As you can see right here, there's a student working on archery, and by using a pool noodle that's cut out and taped down in the shape of an L, he's able to independently square off and identify where the target is. So I told him to square off, targets to your left, hold up your bow, pull back, and let go. All right, and you can also utilize taking string and taping over it. And by doing this creates more elevated lines, and you can put tape string around like the equipment area or just outside of the locker room, so the student can feel with their feet where these different areas are. And you can also utilize the same thing with poly spots. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull up a modified tennis activity I use with some students who are visually impaired to identify where to go when participating in the activity. So I just laid out a bunch of mats. Students are just practicing hitting the ball across the court and having their opponent receive it. So by having the mats out there, they can feel where the boundaries are with their toes. Outdoor activities. So with several different types of visual impairments, photophobia, which is a severe sensitivity to light, is very common. So if you're working with a student who's visually impaired outside, if they don't have a visor or a cap to wear, they might be going from having some vision to absolutely none because of the glare. So by utilizing a visor or a cap, it'll help the student utilize what vision they do have to successfully participate in the lesson activity. Also, sunglasses is another great tool. Make sure that there's some that they have tinted shades with their glasses, and always face away from the sun when providing the student with instruction, because if the student is in front of me and the sun is behind me, there's going to be that glare and they're going to have no idea what I'm talking about, because they're just kind of lost. Sound localization. So sound localization is where students utilize specific sounds to independently travel. And again, this is utilized in street crossings, identifying where to find the microwave, things like that. So by working on this in physical education, you're really going to benefit them in a variety of other settings in their life. So in sound localization, some examples can include using like a boombox underneath a target if you're doing like a throwing activity. And if you go to CVS for about $15, you can get a flying dip, a Bluetooth frisbee that plays music while you're throwing it. I've used it with many students before, and it was very, very popular because you can utilize whatever type of music the student likes, right? And it's connected to your phone. So if the Frisbee is going towards a dangerous area and they're going towards it, you can just turn the music off and then they can stop. And another thing I really like about using the Bluetooth Frisbee is that the music keeps playing until you press pause. So and that's important because when you're working on different skills, using bells are nice, but when the object stops moving, it just stops making sound. And then the student will have a hard time finding it. By utilizing a Bluetooth Frisbee, the student will be able to identify where it is at all times. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull up a little example of sound localization. Oh, my apologies. And lastly, collaboration. It's important to collaborate with our orientation mobility specialists as well as our vision teachers, because they can provide things like braille of certain terminology. They can help you with developing maps, and they can also show you a lot of different cane skills that the student might be working on and how they can utilize it in different physical education settings. So here's my email. I hope that you were able to take a few things away from this presentation. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if you need me to elaborate on anything. I'm more than happy to help you. And if I don't respond back within 2 business days, please just send me a follow-up email and then I'll get back to you right away. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and hopefully for those of you who aren't in in-person learning, we'll be moving to in-person learning relatively soon. Remember, always stay safe, and just keep doing the best you can, and life goes on. Take care, everyone.